Hey, deserving listeners, Natalia Grace documentary. Let's watch.
They just dropped me off in an apartment and then just left. Like, they didn't explain that I was getting an apartment or anything like that. I'm over here, 8 years old, and I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, my God. It's interesting because the first season of the documentary certainly didn't paint that picture. Although I do remember thinking, but what if she is a child? And I remember one person saying that she would have been 13, not 8 or 9. 13 would be too young anyway. But still, it very much looks like there's been a whole bunch more evidence that she was, in fact, the age that she says she was, which was 8 or 9 years old. And I, again, will say that it's a little boring because I felt like I had enough information from season 1, but, they're just establishing it further. And I suppose those details really put into sharp focus how much manipulation the parents were doing, because it wasn't like they only had one opinion or one medical assessment. They had a number of medical professionals evaluating her, and only one of them, the family friend, identifying her as being 22. So that really demonstrates strong evidence that the parents knew, or at least strongly suspected. Well, we can't really know. I mean, denial is a weird thing. People will be given all sorts of factual information. I mean, all you have to do is look at the political landscape, not only among politicians, but among the voting population, to see that you can have just mountains and mountains of data and facts from experts, and it only takes one Joe Rogan to just completely dismantle that. So, because when you have a need to believe something, then you'll find a way to believe it. And when you're in a situation like this, it's possible. It's not letting him off the hook, because any parent with half a heart would really make sure, right? If there's any ambiguity, any parent with half a heart would say, well, we can't just put her in, even if she were 22, she's, she has mobility issues, she's small, she doesn't know people. So it really just makes it look the way that she's been talking about it and other people are saying. It's just that they just completely threw her away. And, if you had told me this story, I would have said that sounds like a tabloid writer that would put that together. But it really does look the way that the tabloids would say it, that you have this child, this innocent child who has issues and presents behavioral problems that is normal. I mean, it's not universal, of course, but it's not surprising. And then you have parents that just have no idea what they're doing and have a parenting style that is, at least Christine, that is flat out abusive, which makes things worse. And then you have this desperate need from Christine to uphold her image, and the parents, I guess the more fantastical story would be that they would have killed her and disposed of the body and made up a story that she was kidnapped or something, or claimed self-defense. I suppose, given the way they're painting Christine, it would have been just that she disappeared or she was abducted. That would be the story that they would put forward, maybe to get more attention or something like that. So that would have been worse, I would say. I would imagine that she would agree with that. But this is close to it. I mean, they put her at risk. She could have died. I mean, the chances were pretty high that she absolutely would have been harmed, right? Just imagine. So, yeah, there's no excuse. And also, the more data that comes out, it really does paint a picture that makes a compelling case that Michael absolutely knew what was going on and didn't do much, if anything. You just think, even if he were abused and gaslit, you just think he would have done something, right? So you got to figure that left to his own devices, he has issues as well. He is to blame criminally, morally. So it's now the other thing I'll say is that as a therapist who was referred cases like this, the most difficult cases in the county around Seattle, I would observe sometimes that, when you're dealing with a lot of issues, a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and a lot of behavioral problems, a lot of questions, accusations, are the parents abusive? Is the kid a psychopath? As a professional, you're not there usually when those things are happening. So you're hearing all of these accounts, and I'd be working alongside with government officials and police and everything, judges and lawyers. And what I noticed was that as the fusion and lack of differentiation and conflict and anger and rage increased, the professionals would be emotionally affected as well. And it was sometimes my job to be the one person among the professionals that took a deep breath and tried to remain as calm as I could, because I didn't always see, in my field, we have a tradition of paying attention to countertransference and emotional regulation. It's very important. We're trained and we have supervision around this sort of thing. So I don't expect that the other professionals necessarily have that. And so, and some of these other professionals, it might literally be teachers, for example, it might literally be the only time they will ever interact with a family like that. Whereas for me, it was, throughout the week. So I'm saying that because it can be hard, and it makes it harder for the families, because when our differentiation goes down, then we tend to become black and white thinkers, and we start to identify with one side or the other. And so it's harder to remain neutral, so to speak, or open to information or recognizing the nuances, right? The other thing I'll say is that when I would treat families like this, the sum was greater than I'm terrible with idioms, but if you just looked at each individual's issues and added it up, it would equal, X. But when you put it all together, it equals 10 times X, because it all compounds on each other and makes it all worse, which really is unfortunate. And you just imagine that if she were with a different family, one of the families that we saw. But we don't know. I mean, those other families who talk glowingly about her, we don't know how they would have fared if they did adopt her. Adoptive parents are usually very well-meaning and very optimistic and very loving, and they tend to give kids the benefit of the doubt, of course. But you just don't know. But you just got to figure that any family would have been better than what we're hearing alleged about Christine and Michael. It's just a tragedy, right? It's just horrible.
They didn't teach me how to do anything.
Yeah, and even if they did believe that she was 22, they knew that I guess maybe they could have said to themselves, well, if we got her when she was 18 and now she's 22, well, even then, right? So you would know that she has no life skills. You haven't seen her exhibit life skills. You haven't taught her anything. At the very least, you would watch and observe and see. I mean, it's amazing that she survived as long as she did, honestly. At the age of 8 or 9 years old, it's crazy.
I'm just like, I'm lost. Like, I feel like I don't know where I am. This place that I have never been to.
Yeah, it's so weird seeing these clips in contrast to the first season. The first season, it felt different, but now, through the eyes that I have now, with the more data that they've given us, it is, awful. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's a new year, so of course it's time for New Year's resolutions. But often, those are just manifestations of internalized harmful voices that tell us we're not good enough. So instead of making a resolution to change something, let's recognize that we are already good enough. Now, most people think of therapy as a place for us to work on our problems, but there are several schools of thought within the field of psychotherapy that adamantly reject that paradigm, like narrative therapy and solution-focused. Instead, these clinicians help us focus on what we're already doing well. And by helping us do that, data shows that we often will gravitate towards more beneficial patterns. Well, one place you can find such therapists is on BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Before, and they just expect me to just live by myself, even though they did what they did. I didn't know what else to do but want to be with my parents. Like, I was just a regular kid.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing her side of the story. And it's interesting how, unless you hear it, you don't necessarily feel it. Now that I'm hearing it and feeling it, yeah, this was her family. The Barnetts were the first family that had her for as long as, longer than a couple years or longer than a year. And regardless of the abuse, regardless of the chaos, of course, she thought, this is my family. She was 5 years old. Of course, she saw them as her family. They didn't see her as their family, apparently, but she saw them as, you're my parents, these are my brothers, even if there were issues of behavior from her. But the way that they thought about her was that she was a con artist and a psychopath, and therefore this alien creature that doesn't have empathy or attachment or anything, which isn't necessarily true, even if she did have psychopathy.
They did all of this just to change my age and get me out of their house. A lot of people did not like me in that apartment complex. I didn't understand why, though. I didn't know that people seeing me like going in their houses, getting food and everything like that.
And if we use this as a jumping off point, we've heard about other stories in this category. The Kaylee Anthony, the child that died, and the allegations or the speculation that the child was killed by her mother, maybe also the grandfather, if I'm remembering the details right. And the motivation, the speculation is that the mother saw the child as an inconvenience to her life. She was a young woman and liked to do young people things and considered the child to be in the way. So and that's just a famous story. We of course know that this happens, unfortunately, a lot, right? Babies being left literally in the garbage, that sort of thing. And it happens. It's rare. It's extremely rare, but it does happen. But those are just the more extreme stories. There are arguably 100 times more stories, maybe 1,000, 10,000 times more stories in which the parent isn't homicidal or wouldn't just try to get rid of the child entirely into an apartment, but the parents just ignore the children or beat the children whenever the child is any sort of inconvenience. And these stories don't make it into the news because the child is, at best, there's someone that's alerted at CPS, and then CPS gets involved, and then they might contract with a therapist. I used to do this kind of work back in the day, and I would go into the home and try to figure out what's going on. I would run into hostile, abusive parents, and they would consider me like an arm of the law, which I wasn't, or a government employee, which I wasn't. But I was contracted by the government, and I did write a report to the government. But I didn't want to create an environment in which the perpetrator thought that I was going to tattle on them. I wanted to help. I wasn't there to punish, and I can help perpetrators of child abuse. They have to be willing to go along with the program, but they're not doomed to do that for the rest of their life. Absolutely not. And so some people, it was hard, but there were some people that would take me up on it. But I think that's really the depressing part about this, is that these kinds of documentaries will focus on the more extreme or more story-worthy incidents, but this is happening all the time around the world. Parents, for whatever reason, their personality problems, their stress, their substance abuse leads to them treating their children as a total inconvenience to their life. And as long as the child is alive and is, there's no marks where visibly you can see them. And when they go to the doctor, they seem nourished enough, then they just sneak under the radar. In some ways, these kind of parents are much more hidden because they might not even hit the child. They just push the child away, get away from me, ignore the child, don't come home. Parents might not even come home or something. We heard a similar story with Jodi Arias. Her victim, I can't remember his name, but the guy that died, he grew up in a family that was like that. His parents just completely abandoned, or, well, not completely, but very much neglected him and his siblings, and he was left in the home to take care of himself and his younger siblings, if I'm remembering right. And yeah, situations like that happen all the time. It's terrible. And the solution isn't to watch a documentary and go, you, Christine, I don't like you. The solution is systems, is tax allocation, is awareness, is giving more funds so that the government can hire more people to work for CPS, for DSHS, and those people can actually do proactive work. If as a government employee, all you have time for is reacting to allegations, right? And you have a stack of files and you can only address the 5 most severe ones in a particular month. Even reacting, you can't react. That's the state of affairs for a lot of these folks, because when politicians gut the tax base and allocation of these funds, which completely isn't talked about in the media at all. What gets talked about is situations like this. But if we want to solve the problem, then if, one, you give more money so that you can have more workers so that they can actually get to that entire stack, then you give more money so that you can have even more workers who can actually start doing outreach. They can go to the schools and say, hey, are there any kids that have any red flags? Maybe we could just kind of look into it or something, that kind of thing. Because I'm guessing that she would have had red flags. Someone would have said something, the neighbors, that kind of thing. Or awareness campaigns of, just going to a neighborhood and passing out flyers. Hey, have you ever heard anything? I'm your local CPS worker. I just want to say I'm here to help. I'm not the boogeyman. So here's a number, that kind of thing. But there's no way that the government can do that right now because there's, like I said, the workers are overloaded as it is. And the other thing is that when you don't pay them very much, then they don't want to stay at that job very long. And also when you don't pay them very much, they can be burnt out, and some of them will become problematic themselves. So that's what we could do to reduce, and we have data around this sort of thing. We've done studies, community psychology studies, public health studies. It's all there. And there's a lot of other things that could be done as well. Like if Christine's parents had greater access to resources and parenting help and therapy, I'm just going to take a guess and say that Christine's parents would have benefited from therapy and parenting support so that Christine wouldn't end up the way that she is, so that this situation never would have happened. It's all solved by these things. There's no, we don't have, as a government, we don't have to fund Amazon, even though there's a lot of tax incentives, right? But capitalism will work to create businesses that will succeed in those industries because that's how capitalism works. But when it comes to this sort of thing that I'm talking about, there's no profit in doing this because you can't charge the families, because at least you couldn't charge them enough. And if you did charge, they wouldn't do it because they can't afford it. So there's no capitalistic gain from it. So you have to have government do it. But you have to have the voting populace actually demand, because that's all the politicians want, is to stay in office. And if they believe that they're going to be outvoted from office because they don't do the one thing or another, then that's when they get motivated. Or a glass half full way of looking at it is they might want to do it, but they don't want to get ousted out of their position. So they hesitate to do things that they want to do to help the people. We need to understand these things. There's a lot of thinkers and public policy people that know this stuff. And the workers certainly know these things. And I've been there. So I want to point all this out because I worry that people would watch a documentary like this and say, oh, well, at the very least, Christine and Michael got their just dessert by being outed and being shamed and canceled. And then people just go on with their lives. But I don't think we should be just going on with our lives.
That's not something that a normal 22-year-old would do. Or, they're not supposed to anyways. But that was the thing. I wasn't 22. I was 8 years old.
Right. So she's talking about how she would sneak into or just walk into her neighbors' places. And the way it was framed in the first season of the documentary, it's that she's this con artist, psychopath, dangerous person. But hearing her side of the story, and she could be lying or spinning things, but at the very least, even if she were a con artist or a psychopath, she's still 8 years old. And when you have the attachment history of that, that she has, and, I talked about indiscriminate attaching, that kind of behavior that children will have, then that's what they do. They don't think of, this is my home, these are my people, and those are the neighbors. Those are strangers or acquaintances or friends. This is my place. This is my home base, and that's other people's home base. For people that have never had that home base, they can develop this indiscriminate attaching, and to the point where the quintessential example is that you'll be walking through the mall. Say you adopt a kid, and they have this indiscriminate attachment, and they're 4 years old, and you're walking through the mall, and you're not holding the child's hand the whole time, and you turn around, and the child's gone, and the child is, you're running around, and you find the child just following another person out of the mall, and the other person's like, I don't know why this kid's following me, or the kid just walks up to another mom-looking sort of person and just hugs and say, take me home with you, and you're thinking, what's going on? Even though you've had the kid for a year. So that's what we see, and then that manifests differently throughout the lifespan. But it's a known thing, and she absolutely could have been highly motivated along those lines, just like, well, will you be my mommy? Or another way to put it is, well, you're my mommy because you're an adult. And neurologically, I don't understand the concept of an identified mommy. I've been taken care of kind of by a lot of mommies, so everyone's my mommy. That's what the world has shown me, whether it's my biological mom or the second family or the third family or the orphanage or the New Hampshire family or those two other families that tried to adopt her, or Christine, or all y'all. Is everyone, right? Isn't that how it works? So there's that. It's also possible that she, in addition, was, lacking empathy for other people. But, if you're 8 years old, the empathy that an 8-year-old has is different. We want 8-year-olds to be different regarding empathy. We don't want them to feel the weight of the pain and the agony of everyone around them. We want them to be self-centered so that they can take care of themselves. That's why we take care of them. They don't take care of us. So it's weird how the first season was just so manipulative, right? And then I wonder, well, is the second season as manipulative as the first? Maybe I'm, I don't know. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue watching. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.